All right, we are live. How's it going, everybody? We've got a big night coming our way. We went ahead and posted to Twitter, letting everyone know what we're going to be doing. Hopefully the title of the stream has enough information. But from the success we had on Sunday, went ahead and took last night off to hang out with the fam. But we're back at it on the test bench today. It's going to be our last night running on the Gigabyte X399 Aorus Extreme. We've also got the 2990WX processor, and it is a beast. And we've done all the benchmarks. We've got the games data. We've got the power thermals. We've got the baseline overclock data. And then on Sunday, we went ahead and pushed the limit, and we got this baby up to 4.1 gigahertz on all 32 cores, running Cinebench. They're multi-core. Actually, we went ahead and ran a full run, doing a single LAN multi-thread workloads, and I think we got like a 5922. So considering I'm on an AIO, the description of the test bench is on one of the cards down below. Yeah, we did a pretty good job. It was a pretty good stream, so it's actually in the past videos section. If you go up to the top and click on videos, I believe it's the last one we did. So you can click on that. I'll be uploading it too. It was just that good of a stream. So what are we gonna do today? We're gonna actually test the other side of overclocking on this motherboard and processor generation, and that's the Precision Boost Overdrive. If you're not familiar with the tech, it's basically an automatic overclocking mechanism on top of XFR2 extreme frequency range from AMD's 2000 series Ryzen Threadripper processors. And basically, you tell the motherboard, hey, I'm running in this new mode, give me all the power you're allowed to give me, or you can tell the motherboard, give me this much extra power. So we're going to jump into that today. We're going to talk about some of the data we collect, how we line up with our expectations regarding what other sites do, and then we might even characterize this feature on this motherboard specifically. So if y'all have got any questions or comments, let me know in chat. Pretty responsive. So without further ado, let's hop on over to our test bench. I always forget which capture scene it is. There it is. All right, so this is our rig. This is running I already told you the motherboard, already told you the processor, 32 gigs of RAM. It's got a GTX 1080 in it. I'm not blessed with the RTX cards, unfortunately. As much as I'm repping the NVIDIA shirt, they don't send me the cards. But if you've got questions about RTX, let me know. I'd love to get my hands on a card and test it out. But anyways, over here on the right, or on the screen, we've got just our baseline setup. I believe I recently updated the UEFI2 version F4 Delta. I think that's their latest official release. Sometimes Gigabyte sends out custom versions to reviewers, and if you follow their forum threads, they might have extra links. But we're really official. We got a couple different software versions I like to use when I'm doing my testing. So through my original 1000 series reviews, I found that ADA 64 is not the most accurate of tools for reporting software. It's pretty good for a mild stress test, and I actually use it for my memory stressing. But as far as like sensor reporting, I've gotten mixed results all throughout my testing. I can't trust it 100%. So that's ADA 64. That's on the right. We'll talk about it more as we go through the night. But on the left here, I've migrated to Hardware Info 64. This is open source software, free to download. I highly recommend it, at least for Ryzen CPUs. And one thing that's nice is it'll actually tell you the different processor dies and what their temperatures are, what their TCTL is, per die, and it will also tell you, what each individual, core and processor is burning from a voltage, current, and power perspective. So much more data. I'm able to log the data, I think, more effectively with this tool as well. So I've collected lots of data there, and we can talk about that throughout the night, but it's a lot more boring, so we won't go into it too in depth. But as you can see with ADA, you've got probably 10 or 12 sensors like easily accessible to you. And for some of the analysis that I have to do, especially with like overclocking, I need to be able to see what all of these sensors are reporting. So that's why I like to use Hardware Info. A couple sensors to keep in mind for tonight. VRM MOSFET, this is the voltage reported by the onboard sensor. It's not the actual MOSFET. And if we scroll down a little further, this first VR T1 and T2, that's the actual voltage being reported by the MOSFET. So we'll talk about that as well. I might not write it in the article. Just depends on how wordy I get. I get pretty wordy from time to time. But those are our VRMs. We want to make sure they're cooled. We're not going to strictly talk about this motherboard's feature sets and whatnot, but one of the selling points is they've got improved cooling capabilities baked into this motherboard. We're going to talk briefly about power and its impact on our overclocking figures, and especially how that impacts Precision Boost Overdrive. And then we've got our core voltage. I've been told this value is not accurate on this board. It's more accurate than I think than some of the other boards that are out there. So we'll keep our eye on it. Current's important too, because that's also another factor for Precision Boost Overdrive. And temperature, we talked about that. And then for grins, I went ahead and we don't want that. Overclocked the memory to 3000. I don't know if it's just the slots that I'm using or the DIMMs aren't properly tweaked, but that's the only stable memory frequency I was able to hit, which is kind of disappointing. But technically, this processor only supports 2933 megahertz on the memory, so I'll take it. CPU FRIT ratios, those just tell you what the multiplier is for the processor, blah, blah, blah. These are the actual resulting frequencies. We'll look at that. And then these are the individual core frequencies. So one of the key differences between a traditional overclock and a Precision Boost Overdrive overclock is with traditional, all the cores are turned on, they're always running at that speed, and they're always burning or running at a particular voltage. That doesn't mean that the workload doesn't impact what the voltage is at the processor. We can talk about that later if we want. But with Precision Boost Overdrive, the processor's kind of in this floating realm of it's trying to test to figure out where it wants to run. So there'll be times when it'll be unnaturally too high in voltage. There'll be times when it's unnaturally too low, but there's a goal and an algorithm that tries to keep things happy and kosher. So That's why you see this large variance of data. The current field is this left column, minimums in the middle, maximum in the average. So we're roughly 1.27 something volts, which isn't too bad. And that's one thing we hit with our traditional overclock. Trying to find that right voltage was troublesome. But Precision Boost makes it a lot easier. So that's kind of our reporting software we use. We're able to log data, store it to a file, so you'll see those files whenever we're doing that. And then it has a timer. So another cool thing about Ada, though, is it's got a graphing, like a real-time graphing chart, and it kind of just, depending on what field or tab you click, it lets you view things real time. It's really cool to see, like, over time how your load changes, how your temperature changes, and that's a critical thing when you're talking overclocks, because sometimes you can't guarantee you're running full load all the time. So you want to know that range of where you're running versus what you're actually setting it up as. So that's that guy. And then one feature that's becoming much more reliable over time is AMD's own Ryzen Master software. So let me minimize this one. That's kind of bad. It's got like this gradient on it. It looks cool, but it's kind of hard to read. But anyways, this is AMD's in-house overclocking software and reporting software. You probably could say it's more reliable than others, but it also could be less reliable because it's AMD's own software. Regardless, I like it because it tells me some of the different attributes that the processor is limited to for when we do tests. So, this top row tells us kind of the critical system configuration points. This core speed gives us kind of a gradient of what the load and the frequency are for each of the processors. Core voltage, I think that's just like the set point. It's not really the core voltage. And then a bunch of other features we won't really get into too much. You can adjust the Precision Boost Overdrive from this menu, but when you do that, you actually have to like reset things. It's kind of tedious. So I don't prefer to do that. But yeah, that's Ryzen Master. We'll pop it up from time to time when the need arises. And then of course I've found myself a lovely Gigabyte background. I like some of these Gigabyte boards. They get a bad rep from time to time. I like to give everyone their due diligence, test their boards as good as you can, and then let's see what they do over time. One interesting thing I can already tell you is so in my chart here, I've got the VRM temperature, I've got the CPU temperature, and I don't really need the Toshiba. That's my NVMe. But you can see that the CPU temperature is kind of doing like this zigzag thing. That is not a desirable trait. Because like right now I'm not running anything. I'm supposedly idle. It's entirely possible I'm not idle. But yeah, so it's doing something in a jigsaw pattern. So we'll need to make sure that kind of irons itself out over time. But let's go ahead and run a Cinebench run. The entire world loves Cinebench for some reason. It's pretty repeatable, it scales really nice. The only downside is it's a pretty canned synthetic. It's people complain that synthetics only do so much, and everyone uses it to prove their product's good. But whatever, everyone uses it, so why not? Well, let's use it too. So let's kick off, a standard Cinebench run, and let's just pop up all of our monitoring tools to kind of just get a baseline of, you know, what a processor looks like, what this 32 core processor looks like under load when running a workload. So I know I'm throwing out a lot of information at you at once. If y'all have got questions, you know, definitely hop on chat. I'm looking at it all the time. And these tests, they take a few minutes to run every once in a while, especially the single core test. The Threadripper, this particular Threadripper is not strongly suited for single core workloads. So it does drag bottom pretty bad. Excuse me. So let's see who all we got. We got Dallas Real Estate. We got Mama Turk. My wife's watching us. Hello. Good to see you. We got Papa Turk. Good to see you. And of course, we got myself watching. Watching the stream, make sure I got you know, enough chat going on. All right, so one cool thing we noticed here is the usage. See how I like the ADA graph? It's pretty nice. We got this little blip here of you know, the high workload. This is the multi-stress or the multi-core stress test, and you can see that as we ran the test, we actually spiked the temperature a little bit. So, you know, we'll have to look and see what the data looks like on the hardware info, but so, you know, we do see things change as we apply load. That's good. And if we look at the voltages, that's, you know, this section here, we do see that our voltage load dropped down to like 0.95 volts. So, you know, from an idle state, we're running roughly 1.4. We dropped down to 0.92 something. So we are seeing a good, you know, nearly 500 millivolt drop. That's pretty enormous. That could be load line. That could be just the amount of processors we have, or cores we have. You know, as you engage all the processors, each of them is drawing more current. So, you know, naturally your voltage is just gonna drop. There's a couple ways to mitigate that. Don't want to get into that here, but for now we're just kind of mentioning some of the differences we see. Looking at the clock rate, we spiked up to a 4.2 on some cores, some were only 3.7. But one thing to keep in mind is this is all dynamic overclock, so I can't really trust that, you know, any given slice of time is running at any given, you know, condition. It's almost like quantum computing, but not really. So yeah, you see how like this 4 gigahertz number changes cores all the time. That's because, you know, the operating system keeps bouncing the jobs around by cores, which is frustrating because you can't guarantee where, you know, your performance is coming to. You know, ideally you would lock something into a core and just let it boost the entire time. But that is one of the natures of Precision Boost Overdrive. So we're getting close to the end of the test. Looking back over at the ADA data, you'll see, you know, we went from like a close 0% load to about 100%. You know, now we're at like a 3 to 2%. But you'd also see that the the temperature kind of levels out a little bit. So obviously there's some sort of software that's kicking in on the motherboard or in the firmware that's actually leveling things out. So I don't know if that's just a feature of the motherboard or if that's just a cool thing to observe. Who knows? So we're about almost done. Probably minimize this window a little bit. So our Cinebench multi-core score was a 4805, which seems really low. Let's look at our results tab. Cinebench, there it is. I've been doing a lot of Cinebench runs, that's why there's so many pieces of data. But we ran a 163 for single core and a 4800 for multi-core. Let's get a calculator. See how well that scales. So we got, yep, about a 3% delta. Multiply that by, so what, 64? That math doesn't do anything, whatever. It probably scales very nicely. But that's a base run, and see how our little jigsaw pattern comes back. That's an interesting side effect of a low load scenario. So yeah, let's go ahead and kick on Precision Boost Overdrive. After we do this initial setting, we'll actually go into a pretty good, of course I've restarted the computer, the graphic's not there anymore. We can find the graphic again. The technology called the internet should help us out. So I like to do all of my maneuvering of the system configs through the UEFI. All right, cool. I thought something just happened. So with the Gigabyte UEFI, you're greeted to the red and black color scheme. It's the same for all their boards. I wish they'd take the time to like revamp how this looks. But we don't care for today. So like I said earlier, our clock ratio is just set to auto. We've also got cool and quiet turned on, as well as core performance boost. This is the stock setting that comes with the motherboard. We did engage our XMP profile and dialed it back. And then Precision Boost Overdrive is set to auto. That's the default setting. You can of course turn it off, turn it on, or we can turn it to manual. We'll get into all those here in a second. One thing to keep in mind is the UEFI version. So when I got this board for review purposes, it came with like version F1 or F2, and the Precision Boost Overdrive menu was somewhere else. So, Gigabyte and other vendors, they're always updating their UEFI, their firmware versions, and they make changes to their config depending on what seems logical. And honestly, this is a great place to put this feature. You're already wanting to change the frequency, might as well try Precision Boost. The downside is they don't give you all the options for Precision Boost here. So I do let you do the manual. We'll get into that in a second. But for our purposes right now, enabled is good enough. If you're wanting to tweak it even more, you can go into the peripherals window and then go over to AMD CBS. This gives you just the AMD specific settings. NBIO. And then here's, we touched some of these the other night with our overclocking, trying to squeeze out 4.1 gigahertz. But Precision Boost Overdrive configuration, you are prompted with a lovely message that says you're voiding your warranty by doing this. So I went ahead and accepted it. Going into the scalar value, again, we'll talk about this here in a little bit. You got a few options. With Gigabyte, if you hit the left Alt button, it does give you kind of a little help menu. Unfortunately, you can't see it with my picture. Let me move it real quick. Of course, I can't change that. Hold on. I'll move it back here in just a second. There we go. So they do give you kind of a brief description of what this option does, but none of that makes any sense. It's not listed in the manual, which I looked, And I guess fortunately for me, there's not a lot of description out there of what it does. There's a couple forum threads, but that stinks because each of the vendors enables this UEFI differently, and the Gigabyte one is unfortunately different from everyone else. So I did some testing with this earlier today. We can dive into it if we want, but for now we're setting it to auto, and auto just loads the motherboard specs that it has preloaded in it into the Precision Boost Overdrive functionality. Double check our settings. We got PBO enabled. Clocks are all good. Let's check our voltages and stuff. Right now we're just setting everything to auto just to see how the board works right out of the box. One thing you could change if you're wanting to tweak on top of your PBO overclock is your load line. We could talk about that on a different video, but that helps eliminate some of the voltage droop. You can also enable more of the voltage correction and safety precaution stuff. One of the features I really like on this board is they actually enable you to change the PWM switching rates as well as the PWM phase controller. And if you're into that kind of stuff, this helps you squeeze out a little bit better performance, and in some cases increased durability and load tolerance capabilities. So they're there. We're not touching them today. I did touch them on Sunday, so make sure you check out that video. What else? I think that's all we need to talk about from the UEFI at this moment. So let's save it and reboot. So I'm sorry that the fans are so loud. I hope you can't hear them. But I do have to keep the fans loud enough so that I can cool this beast. The 2990WX is a 32 core 64 thread processor, and it's spec'd at 250 watts. There's not too many coolers out there that can handle 250 watts, let alone handle it quietly and effectively. So let's open up. Actually, Ryzen Master should pop up on its own. Cool. I love it when I'm not talking out of my bottom. All right, so the first thing I want to mention here is this top row. So remember how we talked about the top row had some of the board limiting factors in place for the processor? Well, now that we have Precision Boost on and in auto mode, we actually changed some of these limits. So PPT is the core or the V-core power limit for the processor. Since this is a 32 core processor, each core draws upwards of 8 watts. You're going to be burning a lot of power. So the board by default pegs that value to a 900 watts, which is, if you're burning 900 watts on just the processor alone, you have to have some pretty wicked cooling in place. In my testing the other day, I was able to get it to 800 watts total for the system. This system, not just the processor. So that value is already way high. And again, that's just like a limit. TDC, this is the current that's allowed to run through the V-core on the processor. So, on the one hand you have power, one hand you have current. So there you have your voltage if you know electronics. So 480 amps of current through the core at any time. That's a lot of current. So depending on the voltage, that'll give you your power number. EDC, I believe, is the total current of the processor, so including like SoC and other things. Again, the value is astronomical. 550 amps is ridiculous. let's see if there's a tooltip for it. Peak current limit CPU. Sustained current limit CPU. Okay, so TDC is more of a, you know, if you're running a workload for a moderately long amount of time, that's what the limit is, but it could spike up to 550, which again is massive. Whatever. PTC is the thermal threshold. I believe by default it's like around 68C, so they're actually allowing you to go to 95C, which is huge. That's well above my thermal limitation that I have for my overclocking. So you would think this could boost this up pretty good. However, this all comes at a cost. That is this value here, CPU voltage. So if any of y'all are familiar with, you know, safe overclocking voltages listed on the internet, you'll usually hear values for AMD, Ryzen, 1000 series and 2000 series of 1.3875 all the way to 1.5 volts. Now, for a standard processor, yeah, that could be and should be okay. But for this 32 core processor, that's huge. You're supplying upwards of, you know, 2x the amount of cores as a standard processor, and you're still supplying that same voltage to all the cores. That's, in my opinion, that's too high. Like 1.4875 just spiked right there. Granted, my load is low. I'm not running a lot of current through my system, but it's still a very uncontrolled. And in my opinion, if you're overclocking, you really want to have good insight as to what you're running. So let's hop onto the hardware info real quick. You know, we looked at some of this stuff earlier. Again, you know, our frequencies, the range is, you know, 1800 to 42 still, and that I think is the sticking point for this whole process. It's like you've got a good range there, but it's a range. It's not a guaranteed voltage or frequency as opposed to a traditional overclock. Multipliers, blah, blah, blah. And then here's the temperatures. You know, things look like they're doing okay. We'll see how that looks in practice. The VREGs are doing okay, and then looking at this guy, we're still around 43C. So this is all idle. It's very sanitary. So let's go ahead and kick off a workload real quick. Again, we're going to run Cinebench, but this time we're going to run a little batch file that I created. What this does is it specifically runs the multi-core workload 10 times in a row. And it's rapid succession. There's no waiting. And then that's, you know, if you've watched my previous video, I think that's one of the cruxes of why people are getting these really absurd overclock numbers. But, you know, to each his own, they have to defend their own data. I'm not going to defend their data or refute them. They can do it themselves. But this is how I do it. And man, I love having 32 cores. The workload finishes just so fast. I mean, that was a single run. Wow. All right, so now we're looking at temperatures through hardware info. This Ryzen master information is kind of fun to look at while the test's running. So you can see that our PPT, we're about 40% of the 900 watt spec, and then we're running roughly 51% of the sustained current. So, you know, 65 we hit right there for the current number, and we're hitting, you know, pretty high wattages. I'm looking at my wall, my power meter on the wall, 650 watts, 680 watts from the wall, and we're overclocked with, I think we clicked 2 buttons. We turned auto to enabled, and we made sure auto was auto for that one setting. And we'll see what our, new multi-core score is. I think we hit like a 4900? It was either like 4900 or like 5200. But, for this processor, very respectable scores. But now that we're kind of overclocking, we are going to see what what values we're really getting. So how's everybody doing? I'm glad we're streaming tonight. I'm having a good time. I like actually kind of teaching this information and throwing it out there so that viewers can replicate what I'm doing here. Hopefully I'm giving you guys enough detail so that you can try it out on your own processors. One thing, this works on the Ryzen 2000 series. So if you've got a 2700X at home, you can try this out. The exact same procedures apply. All right, so we're looking at the results. So I kind of since I changed the test itself, I went ahead and changed the logging of it itself. So this log right here is the old run. See how it's giving us the single and the multi GPU or CPU run. So for the the looper test I ran, I only grep out or search out the multi CPU score instead of like the entire block of text. And we bumped up 400 points, 500 points, 600 points. That first run we got 5547. That's great. I think my manual 4.1 gigahertz overclock, I hit a 5922, which was 400 megahertz above that, but I also spent several hours getting there. I mean, it was not, just plug and chug. It was painful to get there, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. Let's do some math though. I love how comically big this calculator is. All right, so we have 5547 minus 4808 divided by 4808. So we made, with one click of the mouse, we overclocked our score by 15%. No one is going to complain about that, except you just voided your warranty. So if you're down to losing $1,800 because you fry your processor, I'm not. It's not my processor, but I don't want to buy the processor from them. So yeah, on the surface, Precision Boost Overdrive is a pretty cool feature. It's easy, it's fast, and almost get maximum performance out of it. But there is a catch. So how some media publications only post this really high number in hopes of getting better views or more clicks or whatever. Well, that's the thing. It's a single run test, and that's not really genuine. So here in our looper, we actually go and that's why that data looked weird. We actually see how our score trends with time. And right off the bat, we see a 5547, that's good. But we start to degrade our score. We got a 5437, a 5363, a 5215, a 5248. So our score dropped by 300 points, and all we did was just run the test back to back over and over. And that's the thing with Precision Boost. So the whole point is the processor and the firmware are trying to balance this, algorithm or equation where on the one hand, at the top of the triangle, you've got temperature, and on the bottom two, you have power and thermals. And what they'll do is they'll increase the frequency in order to maximize those conditions. Well, if you hit the triangle, you can't go any higher, so it decreases the frequency to keep inside that limit. And that's what we see part and parcel here. You know, we're hitting the limit or parts of the limit, and it decides to tone us back a little bit, which it could be safe, it could be okay, but is that really what you wanted out of this experience? Did you want to be limiting yourself to whatever? So let's do the math again. If all you're doing is like little bursts of workloads, you know, yeah, it's a pretty good idea. But if we've got 5256 minus 4804 divided by 4804, you know, we dropped 6% of our overclock just because we ran a test back to back to back. Hey Cog, glad you joined. We're currently talking about the pros and cons of, you know, Precision Boost Overdrive, and you know, this one test we did was pretty definitive on, you know, if you wanted a long-term overclock and you want to see a prolonged benefit of the workload, you know, go with a static overclock. But if you want just the short burst performance, or if you've got really low like CPU overhead for like gaming maybe, or like if you're running Adobe Acrobat, not Acrobat, that's who runs Adobe Acrobat? Those other Adobe programs, they're just escaping me at the moment. Or if you run some of those other single-threaded workloads, yeah, go ahead and run that. Go for it. So I'm going to run this test again. I should have ran it the first time just so we're not looking at the same screen over and over again. But let's see what happens in terms of temperature, and I guess we could look at voltage too. But let's just look at temperature. So remember how when we turned it on earlier, we saw the temperature spike, and then it dipped and it leveled off. Well, now we're going to see that there's like a cycling of the temperature as we run. And we're also going to see on that bottom section of the graph, the CPU usage is also spiking. So, you know, we are changing things and we are pushing the system. I could even argue we are not pushing the system hard enough. If you're looking at the CPU temp, you know, we're only running 68 degrees C there. The VRM is, you know, 63 degrees. We could go another 20 degrees before we're potentially damaging the part from a temperature perspective. But the worst part about it is, since I'm not controlling the voltage and I'm letting, you know, the processor figure out where it's at, I don't know what voltage it's running. It could be running at a safe voltage under load, but whenever it's out of that load condition, it just messes itself up. I don't know. So yeah, Cog, thanks for joining on, man. If you could hit the follow button. Trying to get up to Twitch affiliate this week. Getting really close. Our test's about to wrap up here. Yep, so there we are. So yeah, this is a pretty telling story. You know, I can't draw pictures on this, but you can see that if you're looking at that yellow line, that's the VRM temperature. It's actually increasing, and it's steadily increasing, which, you know, it doesn't sound too bad. But the CPU temperature is kind of steady, which is nice. So, and then again, there's that same zigzag pattern that we saw earlier. I don't really care about that zigzag anymore. But this VRM versus temperature thing is one thing I noticed. So when I run my overclocks for the Tom's articles, I always run with Prime 95, because that's your absolute worst case power, absolute worst case temperature, and you people are reporting, 4 gigahertz, 4.1, 4.2 gigahertz with this part. So I'm like, all right, cool. Well, I'll work my way there because I don't want to fry the processor. So I got to like 3.5 gigahertz, and I was seeing the thermal regulator the regulator thermals just skyrocket. And that's not at all a fault of this Gigabyte motherboard. It can handle a pretty high load. I think with that particular condition, I was burning, at least 800. Nah, that wasn't 800 watts. That was like 700, but that was like a constant 700. It wasn't just like spikes of 700. And it was getting thermal runaway, meaning the amount of cooling I was applying to the regulators was not enough to cool it. So, eventually the regulator would either throttle itself through a feature called proc hot, or it will shut the system off. Neither of which are desirable in what we're trying to do. So yeah, and that's a downside of Precision Boost Overdrive. Some workloads will work. I don't want to. If I ran Prime 95, I'm pretty sure I'd kill my system right now, and I don't want to do that. But just another data point of, make sure you know what you're doing and why you're doing it before you do it. So I got more data, but I'm not sure if anyone really wants to look at the data. It'll be in my Tom's Hardware article, and I can talk about it in another time. We might do like an AMA, or I might even write up a how to overclock article for Tom's. If y'all have got ideas, let me know in chat. But I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about on Precision Boost Overdrive. Oh, cool, this is still up. Here's that triangle I was telling y'all about. So we've got the temperature at the top there, and then we've got the VRM current versus the SoC power. And with Precision Boost and they engaged, you're trying to balance yourself inside this triangle. And, we look at that. We exceeded the percentage that AMD actually quoted on their website. So good on us. They say it's a smarter way to overclock. I'll let you be the judge. Let's pull up one set of data I took Thursday night. So here's my loop. Is that my loop data? Here's my 4 gigahertz loop data. I'm running 5800 for my Cinebench score, and I got it every time. That's because I'm telling the processor, dude, go to this frequency, go to this thermal limit, go to this power limit. And since I was monitoring and knew I was doing, it was like, yes sir, Dad, I'm right there. And then with my 4100 megahertz run, that took me quite a bit of coaxing, but we got there. And there's my 5922. So super excited. Let's do a quick number difference real quick. My multi-score score was lower with our PBO run this past time, right? Was that the past time? Yeah, so our PBO score was lower, but it did clock up to 4.2 gigahertz. Part of the, balancing the triangle thing. So I put in a lot more extra effort. I got a higher score with a higher sustained overclock. But I did hit a modest score. What's the percent difference there? We got 5531 minus 5922 divided by 5922. It's only 6%. I really only gained 6% extra score by going that way. The bigger number looks better. That's how I'll justify it. So I got that, and this 5922, that was pushing my thermal limit, pushing my voltage limit, and when I saw the current output from my wall meter, I was just like, oh my god. Like if I was running a game while doing that, I probably could have tripped my power supply. It's a 1200 watt power supply, but I could have tripped it. So, well, there you have it. That's pretty much Precision Boost Overdrive in a nutshell. So one last thing, so if you go into the UEFI and if you're using other motherboards, you know, we're using the Gigabyte X399 Aorus Extreme for our testing here today. This is unfortunately the last day I have with this motherboard. I've got to plug in an ASRock board and do some testing there. But, you know, where was I going? Yeah. So if you're using any other motherboards, you know, the Precision Boost Overdrive works the same way, even if the variables and the names of those variables are different. So you can always go into Ryzen Master and kind of figure out, you know, what setting did I change and where does it impact. This PPT, TDC, EDC, those values, those are editable when you go into the manual setting for Precision Boost Overdrive. But the scalar value is a thing I want to talk about really quick. I'm glad I caught that up, or brought that up. So goodbye, Aorus. We'll catch you another time. It's all right. So you can change some of the attributes that the firmware will use to balance your overclock. But there's this scalar value that can make or break your system. And we'll actually show you what this motherboard's capable of. I did touch some of this before the stream, just to make sure I wasn't full of stuff. So if we go to frequency settings, manual, again, you can put in your values you want. We're just going to do enabled, and then we're going to go to the AMD CBS menu, Northbridge IO, Precision Boost, and here we're going to go to scalar. Now this, again, I got to change the camera. So here, there's this value you can feed into the boost equation that tells the algorithm how high to boost, how long to boost, and I think that's what it is, how high and how long. And don't quote me, I haven't read, there's very little like detailed explanation as to what this field does. So with the Gigabyte board, they give you this value that bottoms out at 100. You can't put anything lower than 100, but you can go all the way to 5,000. You can't go to 5,001, that's too high. But so you have this value from 100 to 5,000, and unfortunately I don't have enough time to like sweep, you know, a fairly large gradient of what the scalar does. But I'm just going to show you what 5,000 does briefly for the sake of science. So we're at 5,000. I actually posted this on my Facebook earlier. I shouldn't run this high. If you've got monster cooling, or if you've got you know, extra fans on your VREGs, you could do it. I'm not going to do it. I'm probably only going to let it run for a few seconds. I want to get the hardware info open for you. So yeah, currently right now, I'm burning 390 watts loading Windows. Let's pull hardware info up real quick so I'm not gonna die. It's like I feel like this thing's just gonna like explode. All right, so right now, look at that, maximum voltages. We've got 1.538s, 1.525s, 1.544. You know, we are clearly allowing our system to run with too much voltage. And actually, we're not running too bad of a temperature. Our VRM is noticeably warmer. We were in like the 30s to 40s. Now we're like starting at 51. And ironically, the actual MOSFET itself is cooler. You know what? We're gonna go for it. Hopefully we don't break this thing. I think it'd be kind of cool to watch. Let's log the data too. Cinebench PBO 5000. And we're going to run it. Actually, we're not going to run the full run. We're already logging. Sorry if I'm not talking to chat. We're doing serious business. All right. All right, we're at 70 degrees. 5684. It didn't change anything. That was anticlimactic. Well, yeah, that was not as exciting as I thought it was going to be. But let's reset this thing. I don't want to intentionally kill this part. I thought it was going to be a lot higher, honestly. But we did notice the voltage was a lot higher at idle than the last time. I bet if you had more guts than me, you sorry, the BIOS flickered and that kind of freaked me out. So if you had more guts than me and more time than me, you probably could go into the voltage settings and tweak, you know, the config to better match you. You probably change the load line a bit. But in my opinion, don't use 5000. All right, we're gonna go scalar auto. I'm actually gonna turn Precision Boost off. I still got a bunch of pictures and stuff to take of this system, and you know, it's all for the article. I'll go and click all the buttons and take all the pictures, and hopefully I'll have this article out at least to my editors in the next month. We've got a big project we're working on, you know, centered around this processor, and you know, I don't want to hold that train up. So just stick to the Twitch stream. We'll talk about it more. I'm probably going to put this video to YouTube. It actually went pretty well. So if you're on YouTube, you know, hi, like and subscribe. Down at the bottom, I don't have any cards or anything up here yet. So what are you gonna do? So I'm gonna throw up the waiting button. I'm gonna go grab some more